changing your life one story at a time. This is the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast with Editor-in-Chief Amy Newmark.
Hey, it's Amy Newmark with your daily dose of Chicken Soup for the Soul inspiration, and it's Friend Friday, which means we get to talk to someone very special from the Chicken Soup for the Soul family. And today, that person is Robin Ganzert, who wrote the forewords for our last pair of dog and cat books, and with whom we work closely on a variety of projects involving animal welfare, because Robin is the president and CEO of American Humane Association, which has been protecting animals and children for almost 140 years. So welcome, Robin, to the show today.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks for having me.
So I don't know if all our listeners know about your background and the AHA, but I think all of our listeners know about the No Animals Were Harmed little phrase that you see at the end of movies, and that's the AHA at work monitoring films and television shows. The AHA monitors more than 1,000 productions a year, and they do so many other wonderful things. They are a top-rated charity, according to Charity Watch. Robin herself is very familiar to millions of Americans because she's on television all the time, including on the Hallmark Channel's American Humane Association Hero Dog Awards. And we are sponsoring the therapy dog category this year on that show, which will air in fall of 2016. Robin's the author of Animal Stars, Behind the Scenes with Your Favorite Animal Actors. She has been very active recently in the issue of reuniting soldiers with their dogs. And Robin is a very busy lady. She's always on the move. She lives in North Carolina with her husband and her 3 human children and numerous dog and cat children as well. But her office is in Washington, D.C., and she's also in L.A. all the time, in New York all the time. I've seen her all over the place. She's in Palm Beach all the time. She's a very, very active person in the whole animal welfare community. And we're proud at Chicken Soup for the Soul to be doing numerous things with AHA, including our recently announced program called Fill a Bowl, Feed a Soul, where we are donating a pound of dog food or cat food to shelters in people's local communities after they purchase any Chicken Soup for the Soul dog food or cat food product. So, Robin, let's talk a little bit about AHA in general, and then I really want to talk about the soldiers being reunited with their dogs.
Oh, wonderful. Well, Amy, again, thank you so much for having me. It's always a joy to spend time with you and to spend time with animal lovers everywhere, which is, one of the reasons I feel so truly blessed to do this work. Folks know American Humane because we've been on the movie sets, as you mentioned, for 75 years, protecting animal stars, and really proud of that program. It allows us to go see the top movies of our time and just rest assured knowing that no animals were indeed harmed in the making of those productions. Folks also know us. We're the largest certifier of farm animals being humanely treated in this country, and that's a really important part of our work. And folks know and love us because of our incredible 100-year legacy. 100 years, can you imagine, of animal rescue in our country. And actually, American Humane Association was the very first national animal rescue program. We were called overseas back in the days of World War I to go on the battlefields in Europe and provide for life-saving care for war horses. If those history buffs that are listening today know that war horses were really last used with cavalry back in World War I, and at that time over 6 million horses were horribly, they just died in horrible deaths in that terrible, terrible time. American Humane was called to actually try to save as many as possible, and we sheltered and provided life-saving care for 68,000 horses a month in World War I. Our volunteers and staff were on the ground before U.S. soldiers went overseas. So 100 years later, we're still providing life-saving care for horses, for cats, for dogs, for farm animals. Even this winter, we went to a farm up in New York and rescued farm animals that were being horribly treated and abused. And so many stories, Amy, I could share. The positive side of after you rescue an animal and find them a forever loving home, what it means to the family, what it means to the animal, and really what it means to the community. I think animal rescue makes us humans so much better people, when we can actually rescue an animal, provide a second chance at life.
I think you're right. And I hear one of your animals in the background, but I think that how a society treats its animals is a very important part of what makes society and what makes us humanity. If you don't treat your animals well, then what are you? Now, I know that you started with war horses, but dogs have become such an important part of the military. And I know that AHA is working really hard to try to reunite soldiers with their dogs, and there have been some problems with that, right? I've been reading about it. Dogs being adopted out when their soldiers were saying, wait, I want my dog. Please reunite me with my dog.
Absolutely. Well, a couple of years ago, I started getting calls from our service members, and they were saying, I need to find my dog. Can you help me? And one was a dog that was stationed over in Greece. I worked really, really hard back in 2012 to get that dog back and paid for the expenses to make sure the dog could get back and be reunited. And then I started to take a deeper dive and realized there was a loophole in our National Defense Authorization Act that allowed these dogs to be adopted by anyone or even left overseas in shelters wherever their bases were, and not ever have a chance of being reunited with their former handler. I just thought this was a real injustice that had to be a wrong that had to be righted. So I went on Capitol Hill and formed a delegation of wonderful animal advocates like my good friend Naomi Judd, and we knocked door to door with members' offices, and we had some wonderful, wonderful champions of our work. We were able to actually last November successfully change the National Defense Authorization Act, requiring all military working dogs to be retired on U.S. soil, first and foremost, and then reunited with their former handler as their top priority. Of course, what this has allowed us to do is also share those impactful stories. I've reunited 31 service members with their retired working dogs, and I can tell you, I believe that's saving lives on both ends of the leash. When you see the love and the it's unconditional love that these handlers have with their working dogs have with their handlers, it's the beautiful example of the human-animal bond, and it provides healing after war. You know, these dogs have been so specially trained. They also come back with those invisible wounds of war like PTS, just like our human service members do. And there's, I think, no better home full of understanding than with the former retired service member. He or she understands what it is to have PTS. And I believe that if the dog and the handler are reunited, we can truly save lives. So I'm really proud of 31 reunifications, so proud that we were able to change the National Defense Authorization Act, and I'm really honored to work alongside some of the humane heroes and members of Congress who've really stepped up to say we've got to do right by our human and our canine military heroes.
Yeah, now I saw that Congressman Richard Hudson of North Carolina said that hundreds of soldiers lost their dogs, that the Army adopted out their dogs without contacting them and giving them the first chance, which is horrible. I know that not only do these soldiers often have PTS, but so do the dogs. They need to be with each other, and we can't treat those dogs like they're just machines. They're living, breathing creatures that have feelings, and we used them. We used them for war. We need to take care of them now. They're our soldiers as well, right? Those dogs.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I want to give a shout out to Richard Hudson. Congressman Hudson has actually stepped up to request an inquiry, a formal congressional investigation into one of these defense contractors that provides military working dogs. There have been so many cases that have happened where those dogs just end up in other homes without even even trying to get with the handlers. Now, of course, many of those issues and situations happened before the National Defense Authorization Act, and I have offered, along with the VFW, to provide for grants to reunite. So if there's a family out there that's adopted a war dog and they know of former handlers out there, American Humane will offer them a grant to pay for their their care of that dog, so we can right the wrong. And so I ask for many of those hundreds of new families that have adopted those war dogs, let us know. Let us try to find the former handler for them, and I'll give them a grant to cover their cost of caring for that dog, and even help them to find a new dog from a shelter, a forever loving home that we can, offer for another dog. But let's try to right those wrongs, and I'm grateful to Richard Hudson for shedding a light on that horrible practice with that one particular defense contractor.
So I know that under the new rule, the dogs have to be offered to their soldiers. I know you're trying to right the past wrongs. Is there any legal recourse on the dogs that were adopted out to the wrong families prior to? No recourse.
No legal recourse. These were all legal adoptions. And were they moral or ethical adoptions? No. But were they legal? Absolutely. And I think that's where, where we are, we're working in a space that requires a moral imperative. We have to do right by heroes on both ends of the leash, and I'm committed to doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, have you been bringing these people onto your wonderful podcast, which, by the way, Robin does have a podcast. It's a radio show, actually, called Be Humane, and it's also available as a podcast if you want to listen to it after the fact. Just look for Be Humane. Are you bringing some of these onto your podcast or making their stories available to the media?
Absolutely. So those reunifications have been celebrated on our podcast for sure, on Be Humane, on Pet Life Radio. And certainly we brought the stories out in papers all across the country. I'm so pleased to tell you, Amy, that on July 12th, American Humane Association will be awarding our first Canine Medal of Courage on the steps of the Capitol to several of these remarkable working dogs who we've reunited and their former handlers. These Canine Medals of Courage are being provided by our wonderful friend Lois Pope, who is one of our benefactors. In fact, our Center for Military Affairs at American Humane is named in honor of Lois. And I just have to tell you that these Medals of Courage that we will offer to some of these working dogs in recognition of their amazing valor and courage in the line of duty will really be a tremendously heartwarming and I think life-affirming celebration of service and of all those values that we hold true as Americans. So stay tuned for more. Middle of July, hot summer month here in Washington, D.C., but I'll be there on the Hill recognizing with some of our very special dogs. We just reunited Military Working Dog Bond, by the way. I have to tell you, his wonderful handler is actually in Special Forces. He wanted his dog back. He's getting ready to retire after serving in those most horrible of circumstances, if you can imagine, the hot sands of Iraq and Afghanistan, and how this Special Forces operative worked with his dog. And then his dog went on to retire. We found his dog working as a law enforcement dog in Pine Mountain, Georgia. So we reached out to the sheriff in Pine Mountain, Georgia, who's also a veteran, and he said, "I'll do whatever's right." He said, "But the county owns the dog, and I can't give up a county asset." And I said, "No problem." I said, "The Friends of American Humane, we will step up and give you a grant so you can buy a new law enforcement dog, and let us have Military Working Dog Bond back so we can reunite him with Sergeant Justin." And we did. We made that reunification happen a month ago, to many tears shed in both Pine Mountain, Georgia, and all over our great country as we were able to bring Bond together with Justin. Justin is on his last set of operations. He officially retires in August, and he and Bond will live in a forever loving home. And I'm just so thrilled we were able to reunite both of them.
That's great. Well, Robin, thank you. I think this is an issue that everybody needed to understand about reuniting soldiers and their dogs. I want to thank you for coming on, and I want to thank our listeners for joining us today. Next week, starting on Monday, which is the 4th of July, we're going to do something special. We're going to rerun the very first week of the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast from February. You'll hear some of my absolute favorite stories, and then I'll be back with new stories for you on Monday, July 11th. If you want to learn more about AHA, please go to AmericanHumane.org. And if you want to learn more about our dog and cat books that support AHA, please visit our website, chickensoup.com.